Hey everybody, welcome to the show. This week on Eggs, we have founder and CEO of Stiry. Stiry is a company committed to sharing the good through impactful and entertaining videos that share authentic stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Dan and I connected over LinkedIn. I was trying to connect with business leaders and other creatives in the Salt Lake area, and his name popped up on my list. After a little learning about him and Stiry, I couldn't bring myself to pitch him for business like I was doing to all these other poor saps, but rather I felt invited or compelled to invite him on the show. For anybody who's been listening to this show or following me in my business or anything else, you know we spend a lot of time talking about the power of personal relationships, the value of positivity, and in the spirit of that, I thought Dan would be a perfect guy to rap with. So I will shut up and we'll just get right to it. So everybody, welcome to the show, Dan Davis.
Hi, Dan.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, we need more clapping.
Yeah, right. We'll put it in post. So, hey, Dan, welcome to the show. We're doing this for our first time ever live.
Yeah,
on a camera.
We got video going.
I'm trying to cover my face here, and I probably wouldn't have worn a hat if I didn't know I was going to be on
That's
TV.
what we do. So we just figured I'd add that element.
Yeah, I love it. So thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah.
And for people who are just listening to this show, we'll post it and we'll tell you where to go catch it. So first of all, Dan, let's just start back at the beginning. Where are you from? Where did you grow up? You know.
Yeah, I grew up in Utah, in Farmington. I was there most of my life and into adulthood, and then ended up going to up to Logan to school, and then also down in Provo, and made several stops at different schools to try to taste them all and see which one I liked.
Which one you liked?
You know. But was always interested in business and entrepreneurship, and so my education kind of leaned that direction.
Let's get you to pull that mic just a little closer to you there. Yeah, sorry, we should have done that before we got into the show, right?
That's right. We do it raw here.
This is behind the scenes, raw stuff.
Behind the scenes and on TV. So okay. So you grew up here in Utah native and everything. Were you always like a creative guy? Is that what you went to school for? Or?
Not at all. I was always more the administrative business guy. And just kind of, I loved entrepreneurship and never really thought myself to be a creative. But found with Stiry, which we'll get to, I'm sure, that was one of my strengths in creating content, and that was a great discovery for me because it's a lot more fun than the business side.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. So one of the things we talk about, and actually it's the reason the show is called Eggs, is we use this metaphor of moving your egg from coop to table. So this idea that your egg is your personal project, your brand, your whatever it is you're working on, and it's the process that's the piece we're interested in. So it's a lot of fun to talk about people's process and things. So it sounds like, you had a number of different eggs going, but what we found is that there's an underlying current of creativity with all that stuff. So even though you started out as a business guy, the same type of creative mind that builds businesses also gets into creative work. So so we will get into that. So before we get there, if we're just sort of going through the timeline, can you talk about your first gig out of school, what you started doing, and sort of maybe a little bit of the transition from business student to filmmaker?
Yeah, you bet. So I mean, my career started like most, as far as the naive confidence route goes, where we all think that we're worth a lot of money and we're worth a big title and job. And I always wanted, like I said earlier, to be an entrepreneur, and that was always in my cards. Even though there were others that warned me that path is going to be difficult. And I had very traditional parents. Not a lot of entrepreneurs in either side of my parents' families, but there was just one. It's funny, we're actually now officing in the same building as my aunt that started a company, and she was really one of the only entrepreneurs in the family. And my mom has 11 kids in her family, so that's the odds.
Yeah, that's pretty low number.
One out of a lot, we'll say. And so I was, as I was wrapping up school, I was going into business and entrepreneurship. And as I was wrapping up, I didn't apply to a single job.
Because you knew you wanted to do it yourself.
Exactly. And I had done a couple little ventures. I actually in college had started even as a young entrepreneur, I did lawn mowing like everybody does, because it doesn't take too many brains. It just takes some effort. And
being dad with a lawnmower and they're willing to help.
Yeah, exactly. And being willing to step in dog crap every day and be out in the sun. And I love seeing, the work, everything transpire and feel like I was doing something something on my own, and I was dictating how much money I was making.
Yeah, I can relate. When I was, 14, 15 years old, I used to chop and sell firewood, and that was my, side income. And, all my friends were jealous because I had spending money, but they didn't realize that I'd go home from school and spend 3 or 4 hours chopping firewood, so I'd have that spending money,
Exactly. It's a lot of work, and not most people, honestly, or I read a lot of business books, and most people are not willing to do that because of the risk involved and the work involved, and it's definitely a roller coaster of emotions and energy. But I just decided that that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in charge of my own destiny and create my own wealth. And I remember a very specific conversation I had with my dad in college, right as I was about to graduate from this great institution and great business school. And he said, "So what jobs have you applied for?" And I said,
None. What was his reply?
And he said, "What? How come you're not applying to any jobs? You're graduating in a few months." And I said, "Dad, I want to run my own business." And his response was, "Didn't you go to business school to land, this great network and use this education to provide for a family?" And I said, that's a plan. It's not my plan." And my dad had worked in accounting as CPA for many, many years, and that was the right fit for him. It just didn't feel like the right fit for me. And so I just decided to start my own business in my early 20s, and had that naive confidence that I was just going to make it big and things would work out. And that's not necessarily how it worked out for me.
What did you get into? What was your first business?
Yeah, it was, so this was probably my third or fourth, but this is the real business that I started. And what it was is a sports training and marketing company. And so I had a sports background and decided I wanted to do something with that, and started doing trainings for youth athletes and started training and certifying coaches and working with high school athletes. And it felt like it was going very well after a couple of years. And to cut to the chase with that one, it's a real long story, but after a few years, I actually had somebody that worked for me that went to an event with me and put this on for a bunch of coaches, certifying some coaches for Little League football. And after the event, when the event was about to close, I had to leave to a prior engagement. And I said, "Can you take the equipment back to the office?" And that was the last I ever saw of my equipment.
Yes.
So yeah, it didn't end up. That naive confidence quickly came to a halt, and my confidence was really downgraded.
So they just fled to Tijuana or something, and
they fled to, I don't know where, but in Utah still, and actually started a business. Started
their own business,
exactly like mine.
Wow.
With my equipment.
That's insanity.
Yeah,
I've heard horror stories of that happening in the DJ field. Like I've had a buddy who they went through a nasty divorce. The wife took the business and started a DJ business.
Once the wife, that's
even
trouble.
Worse, maybe. So you mentioned your aunt as being sort of the sole entrepreneur in your family. Did you have any other influences, maybe not growing up, but as you were coming out of school, businesses you aspired to be like, or anything like that? Were there influences that sort of help steer your ship a little bit?
Absolutely. I took a course when I was at school that was an entrepreneurship lecture series, and they brought in successful entrepreneurs and just spoke to us. And I remember thinking, this is the most valuable part of my education right here, is hearing all of these entrepreneurs tell their success stories, their failures, and everything like that. So my naive confidence wasn't as naive coming out of college, because I got to see what it was really like being an entrepreneur from their perspective. Just didn't know how that would play over in mine. But one of the books I read, which was really key, was The E-Myth. I don't know if you've read that.
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, I don't know that one.
But that was huge. That was huge for me, because it talked about creating a replicable business and creating something that you could really grow. And that book really kind of shaped how I started my first business and kind of took things to what I felt like would be the next level.
Yeah, very cool. No, and I think you bring up a good point. So I think for kids coming out of school and young people, maybe listening to this, I think it's really common for people not to think about the failures or the things that didn't work out. They just sort of see the guy in the Bentley and assume, oh, well, he was always rich, or it just worked out.
Daddy's money.
Yeah, right. And so I think it's really important that you brought up the idea of failure. Now in the case of you mentioned you'd started this business and ultimately been robbed, but you mentioned before that, in passing, there were 3 or 4 before that. So clearly you've experienced some failure and things like that.
Totally.
Can you talk about any story or any sort of something as you've been either building Stiry or on your way to building Stiry that I guess would be sort of a failure that you were able to push through and overcome? By the way, this is a recurring theme I see on Stiry videos, this idea of pushing through or fighting through adversity or physical or mental or otherwise. And I would encourage people to go check out some of the videos because they really do touch on this subject. But I'd be curious about your experience specifically.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think in my life, I always thought my story, this is one thing that we really help people do is discover their story. And I think people think of that as a timeline. And really your story is not, it can be a timeline, but if your story is just a timeline, then your story is not, you're not letting it move you to do something great. And so I looked at my life as a timeline and looked at just the events and the things that didn't work out. And I didn't learn from some of those things. And have you ever read the book, A Million Miles in 1,000 Years by Donald Miller?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I haven't read it, but
it's
I've heard of that one.
I recommend that because it talks about your story. Where you learn the most from your story is the story arc. And the story arc, the meat of your story is those difficult experiences and doing something that stretches you. And I felt like being an entrepreneur would do that for me, but I wasn't taking the lessons I should have from those experiences. And that failure of my first business, no one knew it was a failure. I wasn't even honest with myself about it being a failure. And I actually restarted that business, rebought all of that equipment. I hired an attorney to get all that stuff back from me. I got $40 worth of stuff back.
$1,500 in attorney fees.
A lot more than that. I wish it was $1,500, but it took me several years to pay that off and try to recoup my business and my clients and all the things that had been damaged. And I didn't see that as the sign that I should have, that it was time to move on.
Yeah.
And that business at the time was making no money. I was just spending money, and it was hard on my family. It was hard on me. And I didn't recognize that as a failure and as a learning experience until years later.
So what was the final, straw on the camel's back that said, hey, I'm done with this? Was it just like you finally saw the writing on the wall and realized?
So in debt. That's really what it was. I repurchased all that stuff, had all these legal fees, and tried to run the business again for another year. And really what it was is being able to answer to my wife that this was worth it, and that this is more than just my pride. And really what it was my pride.
Yeah.
And I felt like, the influences that had influenced me with my spirituality, my faith, and my relationships with people, I had been ignoring those things and just said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to recover. I've done hard things before. My life has always been, in one way or another. And I say this from a positive standpoint now. It's been difficult.
Yeah.
From a health standpoint, I have arthritis, and who would have thought? And, when I got diagnosed with that in my early 20s that I would. Yeah. So I knew how to do hard things. And so I convinced myself and was prideful and said, I'm going to beat this. But to answer your question, because that's what I should do when you ask me a question, right?
That's okay. We meander a lot, so don't worry.
We just go off. But in relationship to what I was saying, I didn't let that influence me in the way that I should have let that influence me, to show me that it was time to move on to something new. And that was when I had to answer to my wife and say, you know what, we can't spend any more money anymore. I need to provide for the family. And I took my work vehicle that had a wrap on it, that had my business on it, my failing business. I was driving it around and showing everybody it. 2 job interviews, and eventually to my first job out of college.
What was your first job out of college?
It was actually a health and wellness company. It was kind of related a little bit to what I was doing. And I was a salesman. That's all I was.
Yeah.
And come to find out, that company actually, when I showed up in my work vehicle and I'm dressing up, which I was wearing basketball shorts and a t-shirt every day, and now I'm wearing a tie and trying to go sell somebody else's business in my old company vehicle.
Yeah.
It was fun.
I'm sure.
So from there, from sports and fitness and stuff like that, you started to transition into doing filmmaking and I guess traditionally creative ventures. Yeah. So you spent some time working with a local film company here. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? And then let's talk about the transition to Stiry.
Yeah.
50 films, is that what they were called?
Yeah. So I actually, that job with that health and wellness company didn't work out. They actually pulled me in one day and said, we hired you before we could afford you. And I thought, well, that's
not smart, huh?
That's why I wanted to be an entrepreneur all along, right? I didn't want to be in the mercy of somebody else. And so I had to go through that process again and try to apply for jobs and try to find something new. And it was when the economy wasn't fantastic. And so I applied to this job at 50 Films, and they told us that after just I think it was 30 minutes to an hour, they had 250 applicants.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Very, very qualified people. And I'm looking at myself going, well, I'm not qualified. I've never worked in that industry before. I've never run that type of company. But the director of that company was looking for a business person to run his business for him. And the prior person had left. And so he needed an entrepreneur to come in and just kind of shape things up. And it was a great experience. I didn't think I would get the job, but I did. And I didn't know how much I loved video and love storytelling and love how powerful it is. And I started to recognize that within myself. All these experiences in my life with video, I started to analyze them and see, man, video is one of the greatest tools to communicate this emotion and evoke this idea that we are meant to do something more than what we're currently doing. And so I took that job. It wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, but it turned into a great experience. And I discovered that discovery of video storytelling. But the problem is most of the stuff that we were doing was not self-fulfilling.
Yeah.
It was commercial
just
work.
ads. Like
We've
TV
all been
stuff.
there.
Yeah, I mean,
We've
you
all done that.
got to pay the bills, and I mean, there's definitely people who are happy living in that space. Commercial artists, commercial filmmakers, things like that. And I mean, you can make a nice living doing that kind of work. And I mean, it's obviously but it's a little bit more just work. And for somebody who's entrepreneurial, I can sort of relate to this. Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit soul crushing. It's hard to not be out there chasing your own thing, whatever it is. And so from 50 Films, I mean, obviously you got some technical background and some understanding of the process of things, but was there a pivotal moment or some sort of something that made you decide, okay, enough of this, I've got to move into my business, and thus Stiry was born?
Yeah, I mean, it actually came from, to make a really long story short, it came from my wife telling me one day our relationship had been built on just being truly honest with each other. And she actually said, you've changed.
Yeah.
And that was a very hurtful thing for me. And she didn't mean it to hurt. She just meant it to help. And what she meant by that, I lost a lot. When you say soul crushing, that's exactly what it did for me. I felt like I lost who I was because I was focused on product and not people.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was that pivotal moment that I said, you know what, this is not worth it. It doesn't matter how much money I make or how much money I'm making for this company. This is not who I am. I took a little detour and took another job with another company to be a CEO of a company down in Arizona. And it was in healthcare, and I found out that I did not like that was not a good fit for me.
As a guy that works with healthcare a lot, it's not a fit for most people. I don't.
It's hard, and the facility I was running had 115 employees and 80 patients, and that I was responsible over, and the stress and I had a 40,000 square foot facility. All the medical stuff, that I didn't really have interest in that, but I joined that company because of the people side. And I love that part, but just really disliked the healthcare industry. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad industry. It just meant for me, that wasn't
not
a great
your fit.
Just didn't fit you.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I actually resigned from that position and was unemployed for about 3 or 4 months. And in the process of that, I actually started to go back to my roots of reading these business books and reading all sorts of books to help myself and reconnecting myself spiritually and with business and all that. And I discovered this pattern throughout all of my transitions to all these different companies. And that was that my greatest ability is not something that you would put on LinkedIn or your resume, but it was connecting with people and understanding how to do that. And I started to discover that. And then I started to discover that video was one of the best ways to do that and to raise your area of influence to, further than just people having conversations face to face. And so I ran into another gentleman that was unemployed as well. He told me he didn't say I have an amazing story. He said, I have a story. I'm not sure if I should share it in my job interviews. And I Thought, well, that's
Okay.
what is this?
Yeah, geez, what are you going to tell me? Do I need a lawyer present?
Exactly. And so I was kind of,
and here comes the multi-level.
yeah, exactly. So I invited him into my house and he shared. No, I'm just kidding. But I thought that was a really strange way to tell someone you have a story. And so he knew I worked in healthcare, and so he was trying to get a healthcare job. And so I said, come on by, I'll help you. And I was actually in this facility. It's a work in progress now, but you should have seen it before.
Yeah.
I was in this back room. It was basically a closet with boxes stacked over the windows.
Keep the light
dark
out.
hole. Yeah. And I knew I needed to go somewhere to focus, not around our 2 little kids at home that were raising hell. And so I was there, and I invited him to my office, and he proceeded to tell me this amazing story. And I won't spoil it because it's on our website and you can watch it. But
we'll be sure to share a link and put it in the show notes. And
it's just a fascinating story about personal, forgiving himself for a mistake, a tragic mistake that this man made. But he ended up being paralyzed and running an Olympic length triathlon. And I thought, man, if I was to interview you and I saw that you were able to do that, you could do anything.
Yeah.
And so I told him, yeah, you should share that story. And then I just had this gut impression. One of my things that I always talk about is trusting your gut. I just was walking him to the door and I said, can I share your story? And I didn't even know really what that meant. And he didn't know what that meant. And I said, I used to work in film. I can put together a crew and I would love to share your story. And at this time, I had no money. We had already taken out several credit cards. We had all this debt from moving back from this company didn't pay.
From Peoria.
Yeah, this company didn't pay for me to move back from Arizona. So we just took on a bunch of debt to do that. We lost our deposit on our, apartment or house that we were renting down there. And so we had no insurance, anything. And I just told this guy I'd film his story and I knew how much it would
much it would do that.
yeah. So that's kind of how Stiry started.
Was with him, but coming up with Stiry and the concept of the website and the idea behind it, like, did that kind of just get the ball rolling and then you just kind of downhill from there? Or was it more like, voila, there it is kind of thing? Like,
it definitely wasn't voila, there it is. It took some serious energy, both physical and mental and spiritual, for me to go through this process of discovery, right? It was basically that I discovered myself and then the business followed. And I actually think that that's what, if I was to give any advice to entrepreneurs, that it would be, the first thing would be trust your gut, because people are going to give you advice all day long. People are going to tell you
whether you want it or not.
Exactly. Yeah. It's going to be offered, whether that's through parents or family or friends, peers. It doesn't matter. People are going to tell you probably what they think is best for you. But what's best for you is not what other people think. It's what you feel like you should do.
Yeah.
And I don't care if if you don't believe in God or this higher power or nature or whatever it is. There's something deep inside of all of us that tells us that we should do something, and it's there for a reason, and we should do it.
Can you speak at all to that? Not to get too philosophical or anything, but can you, I think one thing that people struggle with, you mentioned having struggled with it yourself, but at what point did you have enough confidence to listen to what's going on in your own head or in your heart or wherever it's located for you? Because I think a lot of people hear the, inner dialogue or whatever, and it makes them think, hey, it'd be great if we did this or that or the other thing. And then they just go to work. They don't put any thought to it or whatever. And I think, maybe it's age, maybe it's some other things, but was there some factor or something in you, or maybe it was external even, that made you go, okay, enough people are telling me to trust what I think. Sure. That I can move forward with this.
Yeah, it came from a lot of business books, actually. I saw a lot of other entrepreneurs that went through the same process that I did, where things didn't work out and they had this aha moment. And for me, it was a series of aha moments. But for me, without being too specific, I believe in God. I believe that God has a plan for each of us. And for me personally, I discovered that and discovered what my strengths were. And then I just followed those things. And so I say, trust your gut, trust God, that inner dialogue, whatever you want to call it. I think if we listen to it, it actually is there to help us take appropriate risks. Because I think people oftentimes will take a risk saying, I'm passionate about this, I'm just going to go start a business. Well, I can tell you, there's some people that are not meant to be entrepreneurs.
Sure.
And maybe others believe that I'm wrong about that. But I have, from my personal experience, there's been times where I wasn't meant to be an entrepreneur. And I didn't think this is a time for me to be meant to not be an entrepreneur, but my gut told me, no, this is the time to take great risks. You're going to start something big and special, and you can do it on your own like you tried to do when you tried to resurrect your business.
Yeah.
Or you could do it the way that I felt like with my relationship with God would be the right way to do it. And I can just tell you from this experience of starting Stiry almost 2 years ago, actually, next week, as I followed what was inside me, things worked out. And as soon as I inserted what I thought would be best, and doing things just my own way and being prideful about things didn't work out. And so I would say that inner dialogue is really important to listen to, but it's a habit that you have to create for yourself. You can't just all of a sudden trust it and everything will work out.
Yeah, and I wonder too if some of it is maturity and some of it is having gone through all these different hurdles along the way.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're learning from life experiences and everything else. Like, I'm not particularly spiritual, but like a lot of the things you're saying are resonating with me, and I'm actually sort of going through a transition almost like you're describing now. So it's actually kind of cool for me to hear it. On this show, we've had a lot of CEOs on lately and people who run businesses, and we're finding a lot of advice. And for me, anyway, it's really kind of hitting home because it's like, oh, I'm at that hurdle. I just passed that one. And so it's been kind of interesting. So it's really cool to hear sort of, I guess, your affirmation that it's okay, follow your idea, do that thing. But I think, and I'll say just from my experience, maybe it's just a dude thing, but I've always been kind of, non-committal or afraid to take that step or whatever.
Totally
it
is a dude thing.
But I found that in recent history or in sort of recent years, my willingness to sort of believe in myself and trust in myself has increased. And with that comes my confidence in following that internal dialogue or whatever. Yep. And so
key.
I mean, this podcast is an example of something that just, was a thought. Hey, let's do it. You know what? This might actually work. Let's do it. So I think that's really good advice.
And that's okay for people to I mean, just to add to what you're saying, it's okay for people to have that internal struggle. That internal dialogue is not always clear as day. It's not like you wake up one morning and say, this is how, the plan is laid out for me and I'm just going to go execute on that. It was a daily struggle for me for months to get Stiry going. And what you're saying is everybody should go through that process. I actually think everybody should be unemployed for 3 months or whatever it would take to get you going, or maybe you need to go on a trip or whatever it is. Because once you actually sit and stop and the noise is gone, I didn't have a bunch of employees I was responsible over. I didn't have a paycheck, which is very uncomfortable.
Motivating.
That's a motivator.
Totally a motivator. But I knew that if I was going to start a business that could support my family, I really needed to focus on myself first and figure out what that internal dialogue was telling me, and then go forward with whatever it was telling me. Because if I was to do what I did before, I knew I shouldn't be an entrepreneur. I should just go get a job for somebody else. I knew that wasn't the right thing for me. And so I think it's really, really important for people to be okay with that struggle.
Was your wife okay with that struggle? That's the question.
That was the surprising part. I actually kept it silent for a couple weeks because I didn't want to tell her that I was feeling, prompted that I should start another business, because we knew what happened with the first one.
Well, and I don't know if your experience is the same as mine, but my wife gets tired of hearing my ideas all the time.
Yeah.
So, because it's always scheming. In fact, when we started this show, we got in some trouble, me and Mike, because Mike and I have a long history of doing things together, actually in Phoenix and all kinds of stuff. We used to run a concert promotion company and all kinds of things. But it was always, we'd just chase every little idea. Whatever
you go
it was.
for it.
And this one, we talked a little before the show. And we're
it's
talking
just another one of Ryan's ideas.
That's how the wife took it, right? And so,
sorry to you.
So I think it's actually a little bit satisfying for me and Mike when we do this, because we've been at this a year. We've stuck to the same thing. We haven't deviated from path. We're making it better every week. And it is a real thing, because we have had a lot of those not real things.
Yeah.
And so it's been kind of rewarding, but my wife has had to put up with a lot of the nonsense to get to the ones that worked.
There is a lot of nonsense sometimes, for sure.
Definitely.
It is like you have to, especially if you're married, that's a partnership I treat that, like a partnership.
Well, you have to.
You have to, if it's good, if you want it to work,
Yeah.
you better treat it as a partnership and make it an investment. And so, I mean, obviously there's some core values there that make a relationship work, but, and one of those core values is that trust we had with each other and that honesty. And so when we are feeling something, just like she told me that I was turning into a horrible human being when I was working for that company, I needed to tell her that I felt like I should start another business. So I just dreaded having that conversation for a couple of weeks because I know we had 2 kids and we didn't have, 2 kids when my first business failed. And so I went home and I said, I'm going to tell you this, but I have no idea how you're going to react. And I am totally fine with whatever reaction comes out, but I just need you to know that this is how I feel. And I said, I feel like I should start another business. Mind you, we had all this debt, all this other, no health insurance. And I'm just thinking her reaction is going to be very different than it actually was.
Did she have the job with the benefits and all that? So at least the kids had insurance or anything?
Nothing.
No.
We moved in with my parents. I mean, we were just going into more and more debt every single day.
Yeah.
And
part of the life. I mean, being an entrepreneur is not easy.
It isn't, and that's why I say it's not for everybody. It's very uncomfortable.
But I guess that's also why it can be wildly rewarding at the end. Is that you've sold your soul or whatever to make or your car to make it work,
or your kids,
whatever it comes to. So all right, so we made the decision to start Stiry. We're going into business. Was it always Stiry? Did you go through names?
We went through a bunch of different names, and it all had to do about life and your view on life. And what we came up with was stories that stir. We wanted to do content that stirred emotion and stirred something that was already deep inside you. And helping you discover that person that's very capable of doing more than what we do on a daily basis. So I think it's really important to note that that's why it started through that idea of emotion and stories that stir.
Okay, so you've got the company, but let's talk a little bit about some of the brass tacks about getting it going. I mean, not like filing paperwork or whatever, but I mean, what did it take to actually get the business going? So, I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, I want to go into business, but it's another to invest in equipment and get going. How did you start as more of a businessman than a filmmaker? I guess you maybe needed a crew, you needed people to actually do the shooting, or do you do it yourself at this point?
I needed to find people that were better at the things I was lacking in than I was.
That's usually the case.
And that involves more risk. That means you got to pay other people and not pay yourself first. And so that's what I did is I gathered up people that believed in my cause first and foremost. And some of the technical people I used to work with were not a good fit for Stiry. They had incredible skills, but they didn't get what we were doing.
Well, and I think that's a really valid point. And actually, it's something that we've come across with some of these other entrepreneurs, especially this guy, Ryan Carson, we had on a couple weeks ago. He has like a real mission, and it's really about helping people. He's doing it by way of creating a successful company. In his case, it's online education, but he built that with the sole purpose of trying to help people get education.
Yeah.
And in your case, the idea was to share good news or the positive stories, or the parts of life that people have gone through where it was, a maybe a seemingly ordinary thing, but they accomplished something extraordinary. To re-say what I said at the top of the show. But I think what makes that work or what makes it resonate is, if I can't, or if I can stick with my thought, is that authenticity or that sort of having that core belief to build the business around versus trying to build a business and put it on people. You're sort of, it's sort of going the other direction. You're doing it with the interest of helping others or sharing their stories.
Was it hard to get your first group of guys kind of to see the vision, to see what you're trying to do? Or was it fairly straightforward? Just, this is what we're doing. Welcome to the team.
It was complicated because I was the one that had that inner dialogue and that trusting my gut to go do this thing. And I told people that we need to go get as many stories as possible and create this inventory. And I didn't really know what that meant or how to execute that. But I said, we are not going to get paid for a while. And I'm going to take all the risk on myself. I'm going to take out more credit cards and leverage myself to the max. I'm going to pay you to help me do this. But we are not going to go after client work. We're going to go do stories that matter. And that was super uncomfortable for me, and it was very uncomfortable for other people because that didn't seem like a very solid business plan.
That's sort of, not the business plan you might sort of start out with generally. So I guess, can you speak to that at all? I mean, obviously at some point you need to make money. One thing I noticed from watching videos on your website is, and maybe this harkens back to your sports background a little bit, but there's a lot of sports videos on there, and maybe that's just because it's a passion of yours or something you enjoy, but those also make really great, really, really motivational stories. I watched one, and I'll probably butcher it a little bit, but but it was a female runner or a track and field runner from like Costa Rica or something.
From Australia, yeah.
And she had spent her whole life being an athlete and worked up to the national team and all this stuff, and then ended up with a brain bleed and having to sort of deal with that and recover from that.
Oh yeah, you're talking. There's 2 stories we did on runners. I was totally thinking of that, but you're right. The one from Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, that's what it is. And so anyway, but the story there, this idea of perseverance, pushing through something, fighting back from adversity, things like that. I think those are all things that really resonate with people. And I could be mixing up the videos, but I think I saw in a couple of them that they were presented by iFit or they were presented by other companies. So I guess that's how you monetize Stiry is by doing that kind of work.
Yeah, it was very cool. We that was our very first real client. We had some others that paid us a few $100s to do different things, and those people I will always be indebted to because they helped us keep.
They believed in you
the lights on
initially.
Exactly, and we didn't even have a company, and they believed. I mean, we had one, but we didn't know what the heck we were doing, and they still believed in us. But the real client that we got came from. It was such a cool experience because they saw that inventory that we created with all these stories. And they called us up to a meeting and up in Logan at their headquarters for Icon and their iFit branch. And I sat down in a meeting, and the marketing director came in. He was running a little bit late. He sat down, and he said, I actually, this is kind of funny, really quick. I almost didn't go up to Logan. I thought maybe we can just do this on a call or something like that. But I was like, no, you need to go up. So I drive up there. Sitting in there, we're waiting for the marketing director. He comes in and he says, I spent 2 hours on your website last night, and I want you to do what you're doing for your company, for our us. Company.
Yeah.
And that's when it dawned on me that not only do individuals need to tell these stories, but companies need to tell these stories. And the way that we get business is telling more stories. And it worked in that scenario. And we did 5 stories for them and traveled around the world. And
so when you're doing the stories for the corporate gigs or for that, or do you look at like what the brand's trying to do, or you look at their employees? Do you look at what just whatever they come up with and say, hey, we want to tell this story? And
we actually, they tell us what stories they would like to share. We validate those stories and we say we're going to do it the Stiry way. Okay. And that's our business model. Is we don't accept commercial gigs. We don't do product placement. That's very
You're
purposeful.
Not going to have the Coca-Cola can and spin it around. And
in those videos,
allow me to turn my Starbucks.
Yeah, exactly, Starbucks. In those videos, you'll see equipment, but this is equipment that those people actually use that help them, change and improve their lives. And so we were telling stories about their trainers. They're people that were inspirational to other people, and they just had never shared those stories before. And you see these fitness videos with these people that are just way more fit than any of us, no offense, can ever be. Yeah. I look at that and I'm like, who are those?
Well, there's a level of going to the gym that I'm just not down for. I'm down for a treadmill every now and then, but 8 hours a day and I'm good.
Yeah, there was a guy, excuse me. There was a guy that, another video that you did, maybe it was for this iFit stuff too, but it was a guy and he was like breakdancing and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the dude was like levels of shredded beyond. I could even imagine.
Spending 2 days with that guy made me feel really bad about my my physique.
It's amazing how that happens, right?
Exactly. But he was a good example too, where you just see these shredded people and you have no idea that they have a story. And I think that's how there's a lesson we can learn for everybody.
I think people are quick to go, oh, he's just a musclehead or some meathead gym rat or whatever. But yeah, his backstory is really interesting. And, his inspiration was his son and some other cool things like that, and you just, I think at passing glance, you don't stop and think about any of that.
Well, he's just a ripped breakdancer.
I honestly think that everyone on earth has a story to tell, and it's just a matter of getting what story is relevant and what make like you can go to some dude on the corner holding a sign, and he's got an amazing backstory that you just might not even know about. Not even
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a really the video aspect of it is a whole nother level. Like going in and actually setting up cameras and getting them telling their stories, and you can see their emotions and you can see all that, versus just a podcast. I mean, it's a whole nother level. Why did you decide to go the video? Well, you have the video background, but I guess I don't know how to phrase my question correctly.
Well, maybe versus putting this out in an audio form or a book or a magazine, or, how did you, I mean, I think you mentioned that video was, in your mind, maybe the best way to do it. So, but I mean, obviously things are getting better for distributing video and things like that too, all the time. Did being able to put it in sort of social environments or any of that stuff, was that a factor in going the video route? Or was video just it from the beginning?
I mean, it was it from the beginning, because part of it was because that's what I knew and that's what I understood could evoke the most emotion. I wanted people to see these stories and see them in there. I mean, none of our stories are scripted.
Yeah.
If you watch them, there's not a script. They send us bullet points of their story, and we actually go in there very raw, and we help these people open up.
Well, that's interesting, because that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about was process. I mean, because these are interesting stories, but I mean, they're produced very well. They're cut nicely. Everything looks really good. But I mean, these people aren't actors, I mean, they're almost, they look so clean and so sharp that they almost could be. You do a really great job of putting together, the families and things like that. So there was one I watched on a family of a couple brothers and their dad that, they'd been involved in some business operation.
Yeah, that was one of my first, that was my very first paid client.
Really? Oh, how funny. Yeah, no. But I mean, it was really inspirational, but it was a tale. I mean, it wasn't just the tale of business or whatever. It was the tale of a family coming together and fighting through adversity and stuff. It was really, really cool. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, and you don't have to give away all the secrets or anything, but talk a little bit about the process. Cause as a guy in advertising, my impulse was, okay, so we bring in a copywriter, he writes out their story, then they come on and they relay that story, then we cut it up and make sure it, tells the story we want it to tell.
Well, I think that the fact that he goes in with bullet points and he's letting them tell their story is what makes it more authentic than trying to get a pre-scripted, okay, we want to cover this and this is how we're going to do it. And if it's kind of like you reading a line, it sounds like you're reading a line versus if you're just getting the raw story,
Yeah, no. Well, and I guess that is what makes it work. I mean, because the reason that these stories are compelling is because they're authentic. And so I guess capturing that is something that's really interesting to me. And, like I said, I mean, I pulled the curtain back on the ad agency business that we would have just written that story. But can you talk about your process at Stiry, how you find these stories, and just basically step by step how one of these films gets made?
Yeah, I think that our secret sauce is that we don't do it like anybody else. We don't do it from the advertising standpoint. We're actually just staying very pure to our belief that all people have this story within them, like you were saying, and that if we help them discover that, it's going to come out on camera the way that we want it to. And so our process really is unique in that we help them discover their story while we're interviewing them on camera. Yeah. And, a lot of people have said, I figured out this thing in my life, but until they go through that process with Stiry, there's a magic that happens where they discover, oh, okay, not just a timeline of events, like I was saying, but the reason behind these things and what they gain from that experience. Because all of our videos will end on that positive note. This is what I gained from it, and this is how my life was different. So we go in, we have a pre-call with them and kind of experience with them to get us comfortable with Stiry. We tell our clients, it's very uncomfortable for some of them, that let us do this the Stiry way. If we do it the Stiry way, you're going to get what you saw on our website and you've seen with the other content that we've done. If you do it your way, it won't work. And that's helped us select out the clients that don't.
Clients love to hear that.
Yeah. And it's helped us select out the clients that don't
want to
purely believe in what we're doing. Because if they do, then they'll want it done the Stiry way. If they want to make it a commercial, we're not the right fit, and we'll turn down that money.
Why use you if they're not looking for you?
Well, and I love the fact that you just said we'll turn down that money. And just recently for me, I've kind of, in my own world of things too, is I've pick and choose my clients. And it makes my life a lot easier and a lot less stressful instead of just trying to take whatever I can get so I, can eat next week. You know, it's a lot better to be able to be selective with that. And to be honest with you, a lot of the headache goes away too when you can just choose who you want to work with.
Totally.
So,
well, that's the thing. I mean, working in advertising, we're constantly barraged with clients that they hire the agency, but they don't really care what the agency thinks. They know best, and they're going to relay to the agency how it should work, rather than relying on the agency's, super creative writers and talented filmmakers and everything to produce materials. And at the agency level, and I guess maybe it depends on the agency you're working with, if they've got an ethic like this, maybe they would be smart to turn down clients, and most agencies do turn down some work. But there's also a lot of work that's just a slog, and I find that it's not rewarding, for one, and then the end product's just generally not as good either. It doesn't come from a true place. You're trying to sell something, and so it's a little bit inauthentic. And so I think that's one of the things that, for me anyway, is most appealing about the Stiry films is the authenticity is palpable, throughout. I mean, regardless, the ones I keep sort of calling out are adversity stories, but there are others. Well, I guess this is an adversity story too, but there's a gentleman who was in the hospital with cancer, leukemia, and he met another guy there who was struggling with a similar problem, and one didn't make it. But he'd made a promise that he was going to, live a certain way based on some conversation that they had. And, so even though it's not maybe a sports metaphor or whatever, it is the idea of going through something really difficult, finding your path, being, I guess, truthful or honorable to your friends and to people. And I mean, all those things I think are just such key little factors to tune in on for, running a life in general. Whether it's business or entrepreneurship or just being a good dad, I think a lot of those are all characteristics that are really valuable. Can you point to a story that you've put together that's maybe either the most difficult or the most challenging to pull off?
Oh man, we've had some challenging ones. As you were mentioning, that every one of these people is not an actor or actress, and so to be able to go and get them on camera for the first time, some of them has been very difficult. But sometimes the most difficult ones aren't the things that obviously it's things you can't plan on. And I would say location makes a big difference in that. When we went to Australia and filmed a story there about another runner, that wasn't the easiest as far as coordinating everything in a foreign place and being able to do what we do best.
Getting over there and forgetting the adapter to plug it into the wall.
There were things like that for sure. But I would say one of the story that you mentioned about the husband and wife that started a foundation that was to help to help sexually abused girls when they were younger, help them as adults adapt better and live a more full life. And that story was particularly challenging because it dealt with a scenario that was very specific that had happened in the past about a gentleman that had passed away. And so that story, to try to figure out how to tell it appropriately and respectfully was really difficult.
Well, and there was some archival footage of that gentleman in there and things like that I'm sure just took some doing to put together after all these years.
It was all on tape, actually, and the tape broke.
Oh, really?
And so they sent it in, and it got repaired. And we spliced it together and
Scotch tape and
yeah, exactly. That's probably what it was. They probably paid a lot of money to have it Scotch taped, but that was what was cool, is we just had many moments like that. I mean, we had another moment with that story. We went up in the mountains, and it was a really bad time of year to film in the mountains because everything was dry, and in Utah it's brown, during the winter. And deer came right up to us while we were filming, and it worked really well because this company does retreats for women in the mountains, and very peaceful place. And so there were just all these things that actually came together, but it was difficult to try to tell this. It was a bigger story for sure. It took us a few days to film, and usually we take a day and a half to film, and we kind of filmed piecemealed it, but it came together, and we felt like that was difficult, but the message that came across from that, it's been one of our highest performing videos so far.
That's good.
Well, and then, so to the converse of that, is there one that you found that, I don't know, it came easy, or was maybe the most rewarding video that you've done or something? Is there some really positive experience you can talk about, or maybe something that you took away from a video that you produced that changed the way you do things? Or
you're asking me to pick favorites of all these stories.
Sorry, and I actually don't mean to choose a favorite.
I know, I'm just joking.
Because there are a lot of good ones, and each one's good in its own way.
Who do you like better, Lucas or Ethan?
No. They're both average. That's how I get it. So those are my sons.
It is. I figure. Not just some friends that you have to choose
random
between.
friends.
Yeah.
So don't choose a favorite. But if there was maybe some some story that was particularly impactful, hit you at the right moment in life, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean that's probably one of the toughest questions anybody could ask, because we've done I think we're up in the 40s of actually we just finished 25 videos we've done about 35 this year, so we're going to be up in the 80s soon about is how many stories we've done. But I think one of the ones that I felt like was really a cool experience was when we went to Australia. When we shot that story, because here was a person that hadn't truly figured themselves out, and the part of the story that we were telling, it was really critical for her to figure it out so that we could really hit the points that we felt like the message kind of lent itself to. And it was so interesting when we asked her some of those tough questions, she actually stopped and stopped answering them for a minute.
Had to think about it for a little bit.
Had to think about it. And that was a rewarding experience, because we were asking questions like we do many times in these scenarios that people haven't thought of before. And hers had to do with self-image and body issues, and the way that she viewed her body. And that's what derailed her in her life. And we were part of a moment where she was figuring that out.
Yeah, a really profound moment.
And that was cool to see, even though it was tough. And she didn't go fully into that, but we actually went far enough that I think the viewers were able to see the impact that it had on them to, how do I view myself?
Yeah.
So that was a cool moment.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's perfect.
How long
that was the right answer, by the way. That was
the right answer.
How long does it take to do a shoot normally?
We're usually a day and a half. We're really lean, and we feel like the more lean we can be and the more efficient we can be, the more stories we can tell. So that's why we do it that way. And
do you take a full crew out with audio and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, usually we have a crew of 3 or 4 plus director and producer. And it just depends on the story. I mean, we've had crews where it's just me and someone else flying somewhere and doing a story because that's what the story needed. And it was okay to do that. So it really depends on the story and our client. And if it's a story we want to tell, we're really conscious of budget. Not just so our company can save money, but every dollar that we save, we can put back into another story. And there's a lot of stories people don't pay us for. Yeah. And so that's why we're being stewards over that budget and being lean so that we can do that. But everything turns out, I mean, as you can tell, you wouldn't guess that when you see our stories.
No, the production is amazing, and God bless technology, because we've come a long way in
totally.
being able to produce good gear, good content with minimal equipment nowadays.
Absolutely,
versus the way it used to be done. So I wondered a couple things, and these are sort of standard questions that we've asked of a lot of CEOs and a lot of folks in business, and I just wanted to sort of touch on them quickly before we wrap up. Thoughts on mentorship. So we've been asking a lot of this. Part of this is a little self-serving because I've never really had a mentor myself, but I've sort of thought about, hey, there's a lot of these guys that I look up to, business people, entrepreneurs, things like that I think it would be valuable. Right now, unbeknownst to Ryan Carson, I've been virtual mentee for him, and
stalking him.
And then I'm cyber stalking him, reading everything he's writing, all these things, because the things that I gathered from him during our podcast together were very valuable to me, and sort of gave me the affirmation I needed to move forward on some stuff. So even though he certainly didn't intend that, it's sort of how it shook out. I wondered, what do you think in terms of having mentors, if it's real important to you, if it's something you do for people, and that kind of stuff, just, what piece mentorship plays in your career, or if it has at all?
Yeah, I think I looked at mentors as successful business people before, and I actually look at it very differently now. I I have a list. Most people have their blacklist. I don't have a blacklist of people that I want to take out, but or that I hope didn't exist, right? But I have an exceptional people list is what I call it. And we use that term here at Stiry is what exceptional people do we have in our lives that will push us to be better? Those should be your mentors. Whether they've started a company and been successful, or they're just a regular human being. That one of my mentors actually tried to commit suicide 3 times, and now is inspired to help other people to change their health and their mental health and physical health. And he's younger than me. He's somebody we actually did a story on. And I didn't know that I would end up hiring him to be my trainer. And he's helped me tremendously get myself in order. And he's not somebody I would have just sought out and said, hey, that guy's going to be my mentor. So I would say, look for those exceptional people, surround yourself with them. Don't look at it as just traditional mentorship. There's a lot of good people out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's really smart. And that's a cool perspective on that. Also wanted to ask you about your daily routine. So one of the things that, a lot of mentors, or not mentors, but a lot of entrepreneurs have is sort of a routine or a way they do things, especially when they're running a small business or they're being lean, as you mentioned, and it can be all the way down to, the type of breakfast you have. But I wondered if you could just speak a little bit to the way that you, approach, I guess, sort of life and then business, and how it all works together in just a typical day.
Yeah. So, I think it's really important to have a routine and not just have a routine because that's what the books say and that's what the experts say. I think it's important to have your, this mentor of mine that I spoke about gave me some ideas about my daily routine and said, you should have non-negotiables in your routine, And what that means is that no matter what, you do these things every single day. And you put them in your schedule and you do not negotiate with yourself and negotiate yourself out of those things. So mine is getting up at 5:30 every day and only having 1 alarm. I used to be a 3 alarm guy.
I've been on this snooze button thing lately, and it's kind of, I read a study on like a sleep study and your dream process and when you wake up and kind of fall back asleep and how lucid your dreams are and stuff. So I've been doing the snooze button lately and it's been getting weird. So I stopped doing that.
No more weirdness. That's what we're trying to do is eliminate the weirdness.
So I'm doing the one, I set 2 alarms, but just for backup, but I'm getting up on the first one.
It's really key. I think that's just the way you treat your body. That's what you're going to get something really good out of it. And that's my thing. I always set 3 alarms, and I didn't just push snooze 3 times. I probably pushed it more, but like
8 and not realized it.
Because I was always exhausted from my kids and from running a business and all that stuff. And I just thought that extra 5 minutes would change my life. And that's what you convince yourself every morning. But so I get up at 5:30 every day. I stretch because of my arthritis. I listen to some spiritual, things that help me every day. I also do a little bit of meditation for a few minutes, and it goes a long way. I get ready for the day, and I do some of those things in the process of getting ready for the day. I do a green smoothie every morning that has the nutrients I would never put in my body.
Yeah.
And I'm not I don't care about textures, or I'm more of a convenience guy. So I just put it in my blender, and it doesn't taste great sometimes, but I just down it really quick and know that I nourished myself for the day. And then I come in to work before anybody gets here. I get here about 7 a.m. and I spend another 15, 20 minutes doing some spiritual things. And then I spend another 30, 45 minutes reading a book that I'm currently, whatever I'm feeling at the time. Those books change obviously throughout the year, but I feel like it's really important to invest that amount of energy before we go and do the rest.
Well, you're investing in yourself.
Exactly.
It's important to do.
Yep. And it has changed so many decisions I've made in my business by starting my day off that way. It has saved us a lot of money. It saved us a lot of time, saved us from bad hires. It's given us good hires. All of these benefits and things as an entrepreneur you worry about, if you do that routine, you actually see that a lot of those questions are answered through your studies. It's amazing
how many times you'll be sitting there and you're thinking about something and you put on an audiobook and, what do you know? They're talking about the exact problem you're having.
Exactly.
And then there you go. So it's definitely critical if you're self-employed to stay
Yeah.
on top of everything.
And that's how you go back to, what you were saying about this inner dialogue. That's how you connect with yourself. That's how you understand how you work.
Yeah.
You're a machine, and you're meant to do some great things. But if you don't invest in just like a car or anything else, and cleaning it and taking care of it and washing it and doing all that stuff, I am suggesting everybody take a shower every day. That's important.
I think you sound
Every
like
other
cars.
day, yeah.
But invest in yourself, because if you're in the right place, your capacity. I heard from somebody recently that your amount of time is extended, and to me, I actually feel like by doing that, I get so much more done every day, and I'm so much more effective. And so that would be my recommendation. It's hard at first, but just do it. If you've heard the 5-minute or 5-second rule, if you take longer than 5 seconds, you're probably not going to do it. So just do it immediately. Don't think about it.
Do it when you think about it.
Yep. And do not negotiate those things. Stick with them.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. Actually, not to keep beating on Ryan, but Ryan Carson, but I've been getting up since at 4:30 every day since then.
Oh man,
that's because that was.
I don't
part
think
of
I
his
could do
routine.
that.
So far, I'm dying. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, I'm sticking it out. I'm persevering, but
Nice.
but I don't know if I can stick to it long term. I might be
It's
a 5:30
impressive.
guy before long.
Yeah.
So but it's funny because the routine you're talking about is sort of what I'm doing. I get up at 4:30. I've been writing a lot more and publishing to different
Cool.
platforms and things. I've been studying, learning sales, learning different things, taking
Cool.
courses, reading books, things like that. All stuff I never made time for before.
Investing
because
in
I got
yourself.
up in time to go to work, and then I went to work, and then and then I come home and it's kids, and
Yep.
so you never get that moment to invest in yourself. So taking that time, especially as a father of two, it makes perfect sense because those kids aren't getting out of bed before they have to. So I know that's like safe time.
The key is to get out the door before the kids get. That's how your day starts off.
His wife wouldn't let that happen.
Yeah, right. No, she has to leave before I do. So unfortunately,
that wouldn't work.
Yeah, so I get hosed on that one. So anyway, in closing, I guess our guest Dan, you can check out more about Stiry at Stiry at Stiry.com. You can find him on Instagram and Twitter, and I guess most of the socials at Stiry Official, and that's STIRY Official. Any closing thoughts or anything else you wanted to touch on before we leave?
No, I think I said it all. Said too much.
Cool. We'll settle
deal.
for that. So, all right. So for more information on this show, you can check us out at eggscast.com. We're at Eggs Show on Twitter and Instagram. You can find us on all the social platforms and also on all the podcast platforms. Mike?
No, I'm good. Find me at djontic.com. And
Cool. And you can check out the newly renovated R2 Media Group website at r2mg.com. Also, check out my newfound writing obsession at ryanrogar.com. So with that, we'll call it a day. Thanks for everything, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.